Our next session is called Nayika, and we take a look at writers of mythological fiction. We have with us Anuja Chandramouli, who is the best-selling author of multiple novels and New Age Indian classicist. Her articles, short stories, and book reviews have appeared in various publications. Her latest book, Mohini the Enchantress, was the winner of the Popular Choice Author Award. We also have with us Kavita Kane, who is the best-selling author of 6 novels and a revolutionary force that brought feminism into the world of mythology. She writes on lesser-known women in Indian mythology, and her latest book is Saraswati's Gift. We also have with us Koral Dasgupta, who is an author and literary entrepreneur. She's currently working on the 5-book Sati series. Kunti, the second of these 5, is her latest book. They will be joined in conversation by Nilanjan Choudhury, who is a writer and theatre maker. With that, over to you, Nilanjan.
But I'm sure it's going to be a crackling discussion with our very distinguished panel of writers on this topic, Nayika, women of myth, mystery, and in the pandemic age of masks as well. And in the IPO of Nayika, the very successful IPO of Nayika, the cosmetics company, women of money as well. So lots of M's, lots of iterations, but I think for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to stick to the, the mythical aspects of writing about, women from an age which seems very, very distant to us at certain times, but maybe is something that we live with, especially in India, that it's with us all the time. These myths that that we're all familiar with are really myths that we have grown up with, that we live with almost on a daily basis. And sometimes they're brought very forcefully to our notice and to our attention by various events that happen. In that sense, India perhaps is a little different from various other civilizations in the sense that we have this entire civilizational continuity from ancient times right to the modern age. And that plays out in very interesting ways, whether it's, in the way that myths influence one's personal lives of, let us say, to use a cliche, Ram as the ideal man, or Sita as the ideal woman, or Gandhari as the ideal wife, and so on and so forth, Karna as the ideal friend. And the personal also spills over quite often into the political and the social, in terms of our imagination of an ideal society, or a Ram Rajya, and what that imagination takes, morphs itself in the minds of our leaders and, people who take the decisions and who try and shape society in a certain way. So in a certain sense, while this session is perhaps not as deep and serious as the previous session by Joseph Joseph on the deep state and the silent coup that's happening, it's equally important in certain other ways, especially in the sense that we are possibly talking of a silence in this case also, the silence of voices that have been suppressed, specifically women's voices that have been suppressed. And that's what I'd like to sort of begin with. I mean, there's a very famous saying in history, and in India, history and myth are sometimes interchangeable, that the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter until the lions can tell their own story. So is that something that, you feel is true in mythology as well, that the stories of women have not been told in the way that they should have been told, their voices have been suppressed? If so, why do you think that is so? And maybe we can begin with that. Anuja, would you like to start off?
I think Kavita should go first, because I defer to her entirely when it comes to, she really, it was mentioned in the intro. I think it was she who was a trendsetter in that sense. She was the first one. So I think she should go first.
Sure, okay.
Kavita, you are muted. Anuja, thank you. Thank you very much for those kind words. And I think her intention was more, I think that I should start the conversation. So, okay. I think she just forcing me in, right? I think, yes, I agree completely with what Nilanjan is saying, is that, yes, I think women largely they have been marginalized in every level of society. So I think mythology or even our epics, though they are there, I mean, you see so many interesting women populating the epics, both the epics and the Puran. But somehow or the other, we still see these stories through. Can you hear? Can you
Yes,
hear?
we can.
Yeah. You see these stories completely through the men, because I think it's men who have told the stories, men who have told the stories, written the stories. So I think women, beside the protagonist, that is Draupadi and Sita, we really don't see recognize and register women, chiefly because I think they sort of got buried under certain, centuries old patriarchal assumptions and dominance, where I think it's somehow where these stories themselves became a victim of patriarchy, I think so. So even the original stories, which actually, if you see the source, especially see the stories of Ahilya and Shakuntala, they were feisty women. They were strong, feisty women, very extremely independent, and somehow through the versions and all, I think they somehow got reduced to victims and sort of a damsel in distress sort of a syndrome. So yes, definitely, I think women have been largely ignored, as I think often is done. We completely tend to forget that they are the other half of the species and the other half of the population. But yes, I think women's stories, women in our stories are, I mean, each one of them is remarkable, each one of them is fascinating. But I think each one of them has their own story to tell, which somehow or the other have, we tend to overlook, we tend to marginalize, we tend to sort of neglect them. Though we are familiar with them. I think we know about Urmila, we know about Gandhari, we know about the Panchkanya, as Koral has been writing. We know about them, but somehow or the other, besides these names, really don't know the stories as such. So I think it's time sort of the spotlight falls on them and give them a chance to tell their stories, to hear their voices. I think they have lots of questions to ask, and I think they want answers to those questions. So I think, Anuja, you can follow now.
First of all, she caught me out and she outed me because I did need 2 minutes to think about what I'm going to say. I'm in such eloquent company. I didn't want to bumble my way through the opening, and I'm very scared of going first. So, Kavita, you spilled the beans. But to answer the question, I agree with everything Kavita said. And I'm just going to share a small example of how women's voices have been suppressed. It's from history. This is not from mythology. Now, everyone in India has heard about the Kama Sutra. Vatsyayana's Kama Sutra. We are proud of it when we are not ashamed of it. We have bragging rights throughout the world. For this amazing sexual treatise, right? And but it is celebrated at the end of the day. It is celebrated in India, whereas there was a similar sexual treatise written by a Devdasi named Mudupalani, and it was her vast experience in the subject, her scholarly attributes, it was all spilled onto this amazing manuscript, which contains some of the most exquisite poetry ever. And yet, none of us know about this path-breaking document. We don't, because her voice was suppressed. It took another brave woman to restore this amazing manuscript to the spotlight. It was Bangalore Nagaratnamal. So yay for Bangalore. And she had a very, very uphill task ahead of her because the opposition was fierce. How dare women talk about sex? How dare women be demure and not be demure and do as they're told? How dare they not allow patriarchy to suppress their voices? So there's a very ugly term for Devdasi in Tamil. It's lobbed as an insult, calling women hoes. So the general thing was one Tevadiya is defending the work of another Tevadiya. It was an ugly insult which was bandied at her, and she held her ground. Bangalore Nagaratnamal stood firm. She said, if being virtuous is a housewife's dharma, then being promiscuous is a prostitute's dharma, and I will not bend my head in shame. And, it's still happening. We have women like Kavita, Koral, who have brought these marginalized voices back to the limelight where it belongs. And I don't think women's voices will ever be suppressed because there are always men and women I'll say women first, because I believe in the solidarity of sisterhood. We are not all, bitching about each other and trying to drag each other down. That's a patriarchal narrative. I think we women have always been there for each other. We will continue to be there for each other. And I should also give credit to men out there who also work to make sure that marginalized voices are heard.
Thank you, Anuja, for the very impassioned, sort of rousing opening from your side. I think the best role I can play, I mean, not that I can do very much to create, to correct historical wrongs, is to keep rather quiet and let the experts who are the women on women have their say. So Koral, would you like to add to that? And while you are, sort of talking of maybe the historical wrongs that you've been referring to and why they've happened, also to just shift gears a little bit, just a little bit about why. I mean, for example, you folks are all very, very passionate and keen on telling these stories and bringing them out to the larger world. So what do you think is the sort of relevance of these ancient myths in today's context, in today's modern world? So Koral, the question to you. Yeah.
Sure. Hi, Nilanjan, and thanks, Kavita and Anuja, for setting the stage on fire. See, the way I see your first question is, the first question with which the session started, is when I read the Rigvedic texts or the very ancient texts, the way they were told, I see that there were stories. They didn't try to, they were not having a propaganda and an agenda towards telling the stories. They were simply telling the stories the way we write any kind of fiction or non-fiction. Characters come and characters go. Some are peripheral but very strong. Some are main. On them the entire concept, the entire plot revolves. So the stories were meant to be like that, of course, with a very, very strong philosophical and narrative and metaphorically blessed language. Now, these stories, the language in which they were told, the metaphors in which they were expressed, were obviously complex and needed some kind of, expertise to be to reach people. So what happened was a lot of people who were reading started retailing, and oral retelling is one of the oldest traditions in our culture. Now, as these stories, which were very simple, beautiful stories, as these stories about rights and wrongs, the great characters and beautiful magic and myth and fantasy and splendor and bravery, all these stories, they started getting retold, and they traveled through various generations of various eras of human existence. And every era obviously had its own politics. And one of the politics that the eras had in common was the patriarchal, the gender politics, where it was important for one section of the society to tell the other section that we are more powerful. Now, while the stories got filtered through that generation of storytellers, obviously they were told in a way where the stories were tweaked a little so that the audience would hear that whether if anything wrong happens to a woman, whether it happens by her choice or whether it happens by someone inflicting that upon her, the punishment will have to be borne by the woman, which is the way in our childhood we heard Ahalya's story, on which both me and Kavita has worked upon. Kunti is spoken as manipulative. I mean, I have been asked by many how is your Kunti? Is she manipulative? And often my answer is that no, I see Kunti as a very ambitious woman. There is a thin line which differentiates manipulative and ambitious. One is a slightly negative word, one is a slightly positive word. But then if you see, you can define both the words from the same context, you can actually see two different words emerging. So that has happened across the era. And the relevance of mythology today is that mythology is timeless. If you look at the stories of Ashoka or Chandragupta Maurya, you will probably not be able to relate yourself to those times, but you know that that is where you come from. We have evolved from that era, from that period, from those decisions taken during those times. But mythology is far more eternal in the sense that it is timeless. You cannot bind it to a time that this is the time period within which it works, and post that the relevance is not there. I see when I was writing Kunti, I saw Kunti as a working mother who had her goals set, was ambitious, and she had certain dreams with regards to motherhood, with regards to, she had problems about raising her children because she had other goals, goals other than raising her children. She was not a typically domestic homebound woman. So these are the stories that are tremendously, Draupadi's story, for example, it talks about molestation, which has never grown old, and it will probably never grow old. Every era, every time there's a crime against women, we will probably go back to the story of Draupadi to find some kind of relevance. And that is how these mythology keeps haunting you time after time. And generations pass, but these stories never lose their relevance.
Sure, thanks. So, Koral, you used for what was for me at least a very interesting little phrase when which is my Kunti, and when you said that somebody asked you, is your Kunti different from somebody else's Kunti, and what is, for example, the real Kunti, or who is the real Kunti? I mean, there is it is slightly easier question to answer who is the real Indira Gandhi, but to say who is the real Kunti or who is the real Draupadi is a very difficult question to answer. And I suppose each of you have answered that question in your own ways, taking recourse to imagination and other published works. And in particular, Kavita, the sort of choices that you've made in terms of your character, I think there's a lot of the my that needs to necessarily come in. I may be wrong, but maybe you can enlighten us, or me at least on this one. So, for example, Kavita has written books like Karna's Wife, Lanka's Princess, which is about Surpanakha, Menaka's Choice, which is about, Menaka is basically seen as a seductive figure and a dancer in Indra's court. And that's pretty much where at least my view of Menaka begins and ends. But you've plucked out, in a sense, these very lesser known characters, and out of their obscurity, out of their shadows, and you've made them central to your books. So what sort of attracts you to these characters? Is it their obscurity? Is it the fact that they give you a lot of space to imagine what their lives could be and to construct them? And how do you go about this whole process? And for example, research versus imagination, which is a hackneyed old question about writing. But what's your process of bringing these characters to life?
Oh my, this is a really long question, but I think you have almost answered the first half. That is, I think both obscurity and the fact that, it gives me a lot of freedom to imagine them. Because first and foremost, I never forget that these are borrowed characters. So keeping that in mind, I think the way I frame my characters is I try to stick to the original as much as I can, because I would like to sort of construct let's say my Urmila or my Menka or my Ahilya in a way which is still believable, which part of a collective imagination, which where people have a certain image. So considering this fact, and the fact that they are minor characters, I don't have much information about them. I mean, even if I search and really, I just seem to get nuggets about these. They are nuggets about small episodes or small incidents, which I sort of try to join through a certain, let's say, sort of a linear story. But I think I essentially sort of, why I choose these characters, because I think first and foremost, they should be fascinating enough for me. And I think fascinating enough or sort of sustain my interest, and that I can write a 300-page book on them. It's like, I would definitely not like to have some sort of a writer's block and say, oh, what do I do more? Because honestly, because when I sit down and with the matter in hand, there's not much about them per se. So it's more of, there's definitely a lot of fiction. There's a lot of dramatization of a certain episode. And especially, I think it was in the case of Ahilya, where actually it is just that one episode. And otherwise, she's a completely voiceless character. So I think Ahilya's story I really did use a lot of fiction, and also the fact that I took a sort of a thread of from the Harivansh, where she's supposed to be Devadas's twin sister, and I think that sort of humanized her more than, say, let's say that she was Brahma's creation. Sort of she becomes a sort of a symbol of perfection. So I wanted to show a woman of imperfection. So these sort of interpretations come naturally when you sort of select the character. So I think I never thought I would write on Ahilya, because I think even when I used to read about Ahilya, I remember I used to say, oh my God, it's like you hear only the voices of, it's only about Indra and Gautam and later Ram. Where is the woman in that? So it's Ahilya's story, but it's not her story. So I think it goes through each of the characters. Even Surpanaka, if you see, though she's the antagonist of the second half of the Ramayana. But besides being Ravan's sister, we really don't know much about her, besides the cutting of the nose episode, or what happens to her. I mean, if she's supposed to be accused of starting a war, like even Draupadi, in Mahabharata it is Draupadi, in Ramayana it is supposed to be Surpanaka. If she started a war, what happens to her after the war? Because so I think these sort of questions, which I think any reader anywhere, or I think it's sometime or the other, he does answer these own questions, that what happened to these characters. So I think I just try to sort of expand on these questions and I select those. I mean, it's quite random. I think while doing research on Urmila, I stumbled upon Menka and Vishwamitra, because through Vishwamitra, I came to know Vishwamitra's story. And Menka, the fact that she was, as you said very rightly, that besides being a seductress and an Apsara, we really don't know much about her. But the fact that she abandoned 2 daughters, I think that was very intriguing. So there are different reasons why I sort of choose and select them. And she was a woman who sort of destroyed the man she loved, and she was also the reason for his resurrection. So, this sort of a paradox which Menka has, or the supposed villainy of Surpanaka, because she is Ravan's sister. This whole thing, because she is Ravan's sister, therefore she is a villain. This is a logical sort of a conclusion we can always come upon. But I think Surpanaka was more, it was not question of, let's say, blanching a character or trying to paint her a sinner or a saint. I think it was more of telling her story. What would, if Surpanaka had a chance to tell a story, what would her story be? So I think it just starts from this very simple premise that I want to tell a story of, say, let's say Urmila or Ahilya or Satyavati, or recently Saraswati. So I think these are women I would like to, by making them protagonists, I would like to make them, of course, as I said earlier, put them under the spotlight, and give them a chance to speak, give them a voice. And I think concerning these, because we don't realize these characters have a lot of issues revolving around them, because I think I'll come to your previous question, where these stories actually put the present against the past. This is one genre, mythology, as you say, where we are talking about age-old stories, but the issues are completely modern. They could be very current, they could be very contemporary. So actually, this is just an elaborate backdrops of a certain contemporary sensibility. So these might be characters, but I think besides relationship and what is more important are the issues which each character sort of symbolizes. So I think if it was Satyavati, it's all about politics. She was one of the most political minded women, and she was also literally the most powerful woman, in the sense she wielded a lot of power. So research and all, I think would be completely based on the big character, the major character. Like if it was Satyavati, I sort of, though she is there for a very long time in the span of things, but I think I sort of, through the events and through the character, bigger character, I sort of try to glean it and sort of flesh out the skeleton which is there. So yes, I think the bigger character, I think the heft of the entire story, I think is based on that.
Yeah, sorry, there was just a related question which is out of syllabus in a way. in the sense that I haven't maybe discussed that. But as you were talking, it just strikes me that, have you faced, you may or may not have faced, a response to your writing saying that, this is not serious because it's imagined. It is, Kalidas's works will Kashi Ramdas's Ramayana will always be the authoritative thing, or Tulsilas's Ramayana will always be the authoritative thing because it is, it is based on whatever it is. But your works being based in imagination, do you therefore see these things being responded to as, mere entertainment and not serious reimaginings of the epics or the myths?
Nilanjan, I'm surprised you put it like that, because I think in India, we take our stories very seriously. Whether it's make-believe or whether it's historical, whatever it is, in India, we have a horrible track record of killing people over stories. So I think that, I don't think this is, I think these various viewpoints, these stories told from various angles, they're all relevant to somebody or the other. So, I'm always surprised at how powerful the response is, to art. I think that's the nature of this medium. Koral mentioned our oral tradition of storytelling, and it is so powerful because it could not be destroyed. Because we love these stories, we memorize these stories, we pass it on, from generation to generation. We only do it because we love it so much, because we care so deeply. So, you have, if you study history, you realize when Columbus discovered America thinking it was India, the indigenous folks, their literature, their history, everything was destroyed, completely destroyed. Whereas here, we've had our fair share of invaders, but they could not destroy our history. They could not destroy our mythology. And that's a beautiful thing, but it's also a double-edged sword. As I mentioned, it can get very bloody. So, and mythology itself, I'll just add one point here. When it comes to stories and retellings, the whole point of mythology, if you notice, whether it's Valmiki or whether it's Vedavyasa, we know their names, we adore their body of work, and yet we don't know much about these men. Personally, it's not like that in other parts of the world where you do, barring Shakespeare. With the others, you sort of know their history, you know what the author was like, you know the man behind the author. Here, it wasn't like that, because whether it's Vatsyayana, whoever it is, it's because I think the focus was always on the greatness of the material being handled. It's part of immersing yourself in the perennial flow of existence. And another important thing is, so it's always bigger than you. Art is always bigger than the artist. We need to be aware of that. We need to be humbled by it. And another thing is, today we have that divide between science and art. And you're either on this side or you're on that side. Parents tell you, if you don't become a doctor or an engineer, I swear you're ruining your life. So we are forced to choose. Whereas the ancients believed that in order to create something as amazing as the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, you have to have a well-rounded education. The Mahabharata is not just a story. It's not just a story within a story within a story. You have the Bhagavad Gita, which stands on its own as a spiritual treatise. It's more than that. You can spend a lifetime only on that. It's also about architecture. It's also about warfare. It's a political discourse. It's about psychology, the human emotions out there. So, it was a harmonious blend of science and art. It's about striking that balance. It's about finding that middle path. That is the true lesson of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. That is the essence of mythology itself.
I don't know if you sort of see your own works as adding to the great river.
No, I take great pride in that,
No, I can imagine that you are building on something, but you're adding something unique to the whole thing. And since you were mentioning science and arts, that's sort of what the Selden plan does.
Thanks so much, Nilanjan. Sorry for interrupting, but just to add to what you said, I've always believed that our mythology is a living organism. It has a heart, it has a soul, and the reason for that is every artist, every storyteller, they put themselves into the story they're telling, a little bit of themselves, and I feel like very privileged to be a part of that. So I'll be gone, but the stories will be there. So that's a very nice feeling to be a part of something that's bigger than you.
And I suppose that's is something that's unique to writing in this genre. Not too many other genres can maybe give that you're adding to a very large body of work in your own unique way. So yeah, nice sort of perspective on that. Koral, I just wanted to ask you that you mentioned that you're working right now on the Panchkanya, the 5 virgins of mythology. Can you just tell us a little bit about what this is all about? It's expected to come out soon, and I think a couple of them have already been published, and the rest are on their way, right? So, who are these 5, the Panchkanya, and what sort of attracted you to write about them?
So, Panchkanya are Ahalya, Kunti, Draupadi, Mandodari, Tara, and there's a sloka. I purposely don't memorize the sloka, but I know everything about that sloka. I didn't memorize it because it didn't come to me very organically. I would have to, I don't know Sanskrit, I would have to specifically memorize it to show that I know, which I didn't want to do. But the sloka says that if you chant the names of the 5 Kanyas regularly, then you happen to actually imbibe great power, be spiritually active, and dismantle great scenes. Now, initially, I thought that, okay, this is just another sloka, which will probably, it will just give us some kind of the power of chant, the power of strength, the power of, that rhythm, the literature, the poetry, stuff like that. And of course, there's women's emancipation there, because these are 5 different women who have crossed, who have great stories behind them, and they have crossed difficult paths. They have traded difficult politics. A series of challenges were thrown at them, and they navigated through them in a way that makes them very, very inspiring. Now, these women, interestingly, they're called Panchkanya, translated as 5 virgins, a translation that I didn't do, but great scholars in the past have done. Now, all these 5 women, in their stories, it shows that they have had multiple partners, not just one. So obviously, it came to my notice and attention that why would Scripture call these 5 the 5 virgins when they had multiple partners? Because virginity means something else. And as I delved into these 5 characters, I figured, and it was a great learning for me to take back with and nurture it throughout my life, that Hindu philosophy doesn't lay any importance on anything that is temporary. And Hindu philosophy considers the body as a very temporary home of the soul, as long as it spends time on earth. So it doesn't give any importance to the body. It lays all the importance to something that is greater, which is the soul. The home of the soul is the universe. Now, from that perspective, when I see this, when the stories talk to me, when I'm spending time with these stories and I feel that the women are talking to me and I am talking back to these women, I figure that these women have been subjected to different kinds of politics, different kinds of troubles, different challenges had been thrown at them. But they were very focused in what they wanted from life. They were very focused about who they were. And they didn't deviate from that simple identity that they had, which they had created by themselves for themselves. I have read in many articles, psychology articles, that most of the goals that we have are not actually our goals. They are someone else's goals. Someone comes to me and says that, hey, I bought a house. And I think that, okay, I don't have a house, I should have. So that is not my goal. It's someone else's goal. And I have flowed into it. The reason why they are called virgins is that They cannot be molded into someone else's path. They cannot be distracted from their focus very easily. They are very, very strong women with with very strong integrity and very, very strong clarity about what they want and which path they are taking and why. And they are fearless. They are not, they are diplomatic maybe, but then they will not shy away from accepting something that they may have happened because of their intervention. Now, when I see these stories, I figure now that I am writing, Ahalya and Kunti are up on the shelf, and Draupadi will be out next year. It is on the editor's table now. Mandodari and Tara subsequently. Now I figured that sloka which said that you chant the names of the 5 virgins, the Panchkanya, and your sins will be dismantled and you will feel the spiritual power. I think now I understand the true meaning of that sloka, that what it tried to say. What it tried to say was not just chant. It is not about just saying Ahalya Kunti Draupadi Mandodari Tara, Ahalya Kunti Draupadi Mandodari Tara every day in the morning. That sloka actually said, spend time with these women, think about them, try to understand where they came from and why they took their decisions the way they have taken. And a vast world opens before you. Many evil deeds, many things that we are not happy about ourselves, many politics of the world, just from those complicated, permutation, combination, they just simplify yourself and spread out before you. Because in these stories, you will find every kind of issue, every kind of problem that can exist in the world and can exist specifically in a woman's world. So that is my experience of dealing with Panchkanya, and I hope that I will be able to share far more by the time I reach Tara.
Sure, thank you. A little unlike, but also similar, but also a little unlike to Koral and Kavita's works. You've also gone beyond mythology into what might be called historical fiction, right? I mean, in terms of Prithviraj, Padmavati. Did you write the? Was the film based on your book?
No, okay. No, not at all.
Okay. And you're happy about that or sad?
I'm happy about it. Please, the film was a disgrace. I'm putting it out there.
So just in terms of spanning across these genres of historical fiction and mythological fiction, is there a difference in the process and the way you approach this? Is there a difference in the way your readers respond to it? And can you just tell us a little about that?
Yeah, honestly speaking, history is dicier than mythology for sure, because, gods and goddesses, you put them on they are exalted, elevated beings. So there's a level of distance there, although that can also get very, very dicey. Like I said, in India, we take our stories very seriously. But history, it's very dicey because the problem is everyone feels that their version of something or their adherence to somebody's version of something is the version of history. But if you're a scholar of history, or even if you're a history buff, you will realize that there's always an agenda when it comes to history. Most of the historical works that have stood the test of time, they were originally commissioned by rulers. So if you're writing a book about a ruler, you're not going to say it like it is. You're going to pander to that person's ego, because forget getting pulled up or imprisoned, you lose your head, literally. You lose your head if you're going to annoy the ruler. So, you'll have, and it was like at that time.
I can't help interrupting, but have you annoyed someone enough so that they wanted your head off?
I do. If you read my hate mail, forget about losing my head. You get all these ugly threats, which I never honor by mentioning and all. So if you want to argue with me, my policy is, if you want to argue with me, that's fine. That's fine. I love a good argument. But if you're going to get vulgar and if you're going to, levy threats, and all that, then I just block that person.
Would you mind giving an example of something that's really bugged people in any of your writings? Is it about Prithviraj or Alauddin Khilji?
I think Padmavati was super dicey because the film was out, and the thing is, I don't think I'm a superstar like Deepika. So Deepika bore the brunt of the attacks, but I did get some hate mail around that time. So as I was saying, the problem itself is because, everyone has strong ideas about these things. But as a scholar or a fan of history, you need to understand that there are different versions. If you do your research, you will realize that there are extremely inconsistent versions out there. On the one hand, if you're taking one character, you'll have writers from that period. You'll have writers who wrote 2 centuries later for another king who had a problem with the previous king or who loved the previous king. So it depends on that perspective. So you have these so-called facts which are at odds with each other, and there's no way. So far we don't have a time machine, so you can't go back there and be an investigative journalist like Josie Joseph and try and figure it out for yourself. You have to go with your gut. It's like an investigation. It's a mystery. You have to go with your gut. You have to get as much information, do your research thoroughly, but there will be gaps in the narrative, which is why I write historical fiction, because I try to, string the story together the way I see it. It has to make sense to me. And if I find something problematic, I am not going to repeat it just because it's been repeated for centuries. So again, Padmavati, I think there's nothing glorious about the fact that women have to burn because men are ambitious and men like playing at war. Kavita just mentioned, Draupadi gets blamed for the war in the Mahabharata. And on this side, you have Surpanaka. I think war was always a man's sport. Let's agree to that. So why do women get, blamed for it? So I think if I think, Jauhar is problematic, I will not glorify it in my book. I will not call it an act of courage, because I know for a fact that, they leave these things out, but it is noted, it has been documented that women were coerced into committing Jauhar. They were forced for political reasons. They were drugged. The women who struggled were drugged. It was a mixture called Koshambi. They were forced to drink this opiate-laced drink so that they don't go kicking and screaming to the flames. That won't look like a Sanjay Leela Bansali flick. It'll look ugly. So, they drug these women and they walk into the flames with glassy eyes because they have no bloody idea what they're doing. And that is murder. We need to accept that. We need to accept. And for centuries afterwards, women have been burned. Sati, Jauhar, call it what you want, sacrificed on the altar of male ego. So when I write a book, I don't care whether history takes second place. I will condemn something if I think it's problematic.
Sure. So,
bravo.
I think all of you do great service by bringing out your own, sensibilities into these characters whom history has done, disservice to in certain ways, or historical writings have done disservice to. And in a way, you're in your own ways, you're hopefully reversing the wrongs of the past. And for example, I had no idea about this, the women being drugged and that being the basis for Jauhar. Not that I believe that. I
think what actually happens is that an author, as authors, since we are doing this.
The person on my left, Mohan, that we're almost at the end of our session. So maybe just 2 questions. 3 o'clock is the next session, right?
Correct. Yeah, we need some setup time as well. So.
Oh, but it's only 2:45 now. Am I mistaken?
Correct. Yeah, no, we'll take 2 questions. I think that's good.
Yeah, 2 questions. Sorry, Kavita. But
no. What I was trying to tell you here is that I think first readers, I think we sort of underestimate our readers. I think readers know it is fiction. When we say it's historical fiction and it's mythofiction, they definitely know it's fiction. I think the whole thing is sensationalized by people who actually have not read the book at all. So I think it's just a motley few who sort of create the controversy and whatever. I think it's sort of it sort of all rolls up into one huge ugly affair. So I think an author, I think as Anuja very rightly said, we are adding a contemporary sensibility also because you have to see the other side of whatever happened then. These are stories of, whether it's historical stories, whether they're mythological stories, these are stories of centuries and 100 years old. And when a modern author is going to write about it, obviously he's just not retelling, he is revisioning it, he's reinterpreting it, he's interrogating the entire issues and the characters. So I think all this is part of the fiction. I think that is what, and I think readers, I think they're pretty discerning, they do realize all this.
Okay. Just a couple of questions, maybe from the audience.
Namaste. I'm Yamini Mutana. I am a Bharatanatyam dancer. So we use a lot of this Nayiki and Nayika bhavas in our dance also. So for us, basically, when we are looking at a character, sometimes we present our character the way we want to present. Even if it's Draupadi, some of them present Draupadi being a damsel in distress, some of them showing great power in the eyes, and So we have different things, and we pick up these elements of explanation or explaining a woman from the Natya Shastra, where we have the different Nayikas already explained. We have the Vipralabdha Nayiki, we have the Khandita Nayiki, we have the Vidodh Khandita Nayiki, we have the Abhisarika Nayiki. We have different Nayikis like that. And how do you actually, do you also have something like that, a reference where, when you bring out a character from the epics, do you also have something which you would refer to, or it's the woman, or if it's the story which you dig into? For us, say, for example, if it is...
I think let them take a stab at answering the question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Since you mentioned the Natya Shastra, I will use that as a reference because I'm also a dancer, so I get where you're coming from. So the Natya Shastra, when it was originally written by Bharata, there's a passage where he makes it clear that his is not the definitive text on dance. This work has prevailed over the centuries, and yet the humility of the man boggles the mind. And he says, this is intended to be a guide, and based on the requirements of the age, you should keep adding to it. Because to give an example again, in those days when the original Dasis were performing, they used to dance without covering the upper half of their body. They will expose their breasts and just decorate it with either paint or maybe strands of pearls. But it wasn't considered vulgar to show your breasts in a tropical climate like this. But it was frowned upon for Dasis to lift their feet. While showing Nadraja, we all lift our feet, or we do the Uddha Tandava pose where we lift up our leg like that. We do it today because we like to show off that we hit the gym and we can. Those Dasis would consider that vulgar. Whereas today you can't dance topless. You will be called a stripper or a cabaret dancer, and they will probably arrest you for lewd and lascivious conduct or something. So it's it's how it is with the changing times. So it is the same for me personally when I'm, borrowing a character from mythology. Some of it has to reflect the changing times, but we build on an existing foundation. We build on a body of work, a beautiful body of work that's already there. So the key word here is respect. Respect for the past, but not blind adherence to it either.
Okay, I'm really sorry, but Mohan will strangle me soon. So we really have to end this, and I'll be part of Myth then. And we really have to end this now. But thank you so much, Kavita, Koral, Anuja. It was a great pleasure to have you here. And thank you to the audience for your patient listening. I was much better informed, and thanks to you. And good day to all of you. Mohan.
Thank you so much.